Hi everyone, I'm Joel from Coaches Rising, and this dialogue's been recorded as part of the Power of Embodied Transformation 2016. For more information on that, you can visit www.powerofembodiedtransformation.com. So in this dialogue, I'm talking with Doug Silsby, and he's a very well-known and well-respected leadership coach. He's the author of 2 great books and a regular speaker at conferences. His approach combines the cutting edge of neuroscience, mindfulness, and adult development. I hope you enjoy. It's great to be with you again today, Doug. And we've done this quite a number of times now, and I always just love this space that we enter into when we come together. And I'm excited to what's going to come out of today. So it's great to have you with us.
Well, it's nice to be with you, Joel, for this conversation. I look forward to another great poet course as well. We've got a pretty long tradition at this point, so I look forward to building.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to explore in this call, just in the next kind of 50 minutes or so, what is an embodied approach to coaching and to transformation? And I wanted to start by asking you, what was it that led you to start working in this way? I know you've trained at the Strossi Institute, and now you've developed, this really amazing work, presence-based coaching, and I'm a huge fan of that, and it's really proliferating around the world. And so, what is it that led you to that? Like, what's the kind of coaching you were doing before that, and then what led you to it?
Yeah, mindfulness was really central in the coaching work that I was doing before, and that came out of included some elements of John Kabat-Zinn's work and Soto Zen tradition. And the first book that I wrote mentions the word mind and derivations of the word mind, I think 436 times, and the word body was in there 12 times. I've done the word search. So what that reveals is a certain tendency to organize around cognition. And as a genetically inbred physicist, it's understandable that I would lead with the mind. But with hindsight, there was a lot left out. And so what this points to, a couple things. Sort of one is this process of development that we're all in, of transcending and including, of a bigger, more complex meaning-making structure. And so for me, in my own evolution, at some point, I saw the limitations of working purely cognitively, and how many people would declare intentions but not actually create change on the ground. And so, including the body in that, my first exposure to that, to somatic approaches, was with James Flaherty in New Ventures West, and then I studied with Peter Levine's organization for a couple years, and then a lot with Richard Strozzi as a primary teacher in that, who's following me in this poet course, and then some other teachers as well. And what I saw consistently over time is how engagement of the whole person, of the body in the realm of sensation and of somatic practices, reliably produced a sustainable long-term behavioral change in a way that purely cognitive approaches rarely did. And so now I can't imagine not including that. It doesn't make sense to not include it. I mean, why would we drive a car from here to California running on 2 of the 6 cylinders of the motor, when we've got all 6 cylinders available, 2 cylinders being our brain and 6 cylinders being our entire nervous system and consciousness and all the aliveness that's available in that.
Beautiful. And you said, you alluded to that it's not just the body, when I think sometimes people think, somatic coaching, presence-based coaching, it's about coaching with the body. And it's a lot more than that, isn't it? It's a lot more than that. I wonder if you could give us a sense of that kind of territory that we start to open up working in this way.
Yeah, what's amazing for me to see is that um, my own internal experience of sensation, what you see being present with me, or hear being present with me, the way in which I hold my body, the specific language that forms and comes out of my mouth, all these phenomena actually arise from the same nervous system, arise from the same set of conditioned habits and tendencies that we learned actually pretty early in life. And so the body, both the both external observations about the body and our internal experience of sensation, both of those are ways in, but also our patterns and language, the behaviors that we engage in automatically. All these different phenomena are doorways into this underlying habit nature, this underlying conditioning. And when we're able to spot that conditioning arising through any number of different approaches in the moment, then we can be present with the phenomena of our habits, and we can suspend the automaticity of those habits and actually replace it with something else that's more useful. Um, this is, in a lot of ways, adult development theory made pragmatic.
Mm.
And I think all these different fields, presence-based coaching and many other disciplines in coaching, are taking all these different streams and integrating them in um, a profound approach to changing and accelerating human evolution. I think it's an extraordinarily exciting time we live in, and that the burgeoning acceptance of somatics and mindfulness and awareness about adult development and stages of development and integral theory and all these things are just I think indicators of how fast this process is moving at this point.
Mm. Wow, what a rich answer, very lucid. And I'm just thinking back to my coaching before I started to implement this kind of way of working, and it just felt sometimes like it was just hard work. I kind of didn't really know quite how to help somebody make these kinds of transformations and shifts. And it was only when I started to open up and work in this kind of way that it all became, in a way which I think you're talking about, it's very practical, pragmatic, and you can start to create this kind of prolonged embodied change.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. Well, Keegan writes about how we operate out of our using slightly different words, writes about how we operate out of our meaning making framework, out of our habit structure, which we call in our work the bell jar. We operate until the context changes sufficiently that our meaning making is becomes hopelessly inadequate for to the task, and then something disrupts that, and there's this expansion, sometimes a transformational shift to a new way of seeing the world and interacting with it, and new kinds of actions that then become available. And this, of course, is the subject object move of development, moving to a bigger meaning making framework, but also embodying new capacities. Then get that they're then accessible to us in these changing contexts that we live in.
Mm.
And if our meaning making and our capacity to regulate our own state and the actions that we can take don't evolve as quickly as the context evolves, we're in big trouble. I think that's what we're seeing on the planet these days. And so what we do on an individual level is a microcosm of that process of waking up to ourselves.
Mm. Beautiful. So I want to ground that in a very kind of, see if I can challenge you to ground it in a very practical example. So how would that look? Say somebody comes and they want to start working with you. How do you start to work with them in this way?
Uh, Sure. So maybe a high level view of this would be that we have some conversation about commitments and what they're committed to,
Mm.
and what they care about most deeply and why that's important to them. And so we elicit in the conversation some kind of a declared future that they intend. And then we become very curious about how both out there in the world and right here in this moment, in this conversation, how is their bell jar, how are their conditioned structures that are spotlighted by this commitment being revealed in a way that we can make them visible and explicit. And so, again, in the development world, we talk about the subject object move, that we take these things that are invisible to us and implicit and we make them explicit. And so, in my work with clients, we want to take the ways that they are actually seeing and interpreting this commitment and seeing and interpreting their context, make those explicit. So they're seeing, our seeing itself becomes explicit.
Mm.
Our being itself becomes explicit. We see that we have an inner state and that we can attend to that inner state, and we can bring our attention to it, and we can self-regulate it. We can work with our mood, and then gaining some mastery over our seeing and learning to work with our inner state intentionally and consciously. Then our doing, our actions naturally arise out of this state. And so seeing, being, and doing, instead of being these sort of invisible verbs that are just running in the background, we're actually taking seeing, being, and doing and putting them out in front of ourselves so we can say, all right, let's choose the maps and perspectives and lenses through which we view the world. Let's engage actively with our inner state so that we can access our creativeness and our resourcefulness and our settledness in the midst of chaos and complexity and unpredictability. And then let's make our doing object so that we can extend that state into the world in ways that are compassionate and generative and more optimal in terms of responding to what's coming at us. I think that's what we're up to here.
Yeah, beautiful. So it's like people are coming in and they are they're feeling this commitment to something, or perhaps like a calling towards something. They want something, and then it's not working out, and that's why a lot of people come into coaching. And then working in this embodied way, we're able to help them see, what are what's this conditioning that keeps getting in the way of me actually, getting that thing that I want. And we're able in this embodied way to help them see that not just as a concept, but how does it show up in the moment, in relationship to that thing that they want. And then, we're also able to shift into new creative states. If I want to make sure that's like, I've got that right.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it is right. I mean, states arise. We get triggered by things. Old habit states show up, and all this is part of the dynamic. And by bringing attention to them, we gain this level of inner mastery that anybody with practice can acquire. It isn't rocket science. I think sometimes clients come in really clear about what they're committed to, and sometimes they don't have any idea. They might have had some sort of a breakdown, a difficult performance review, or some huge challenge that they feel overwhelmed by, or they might simply have an aspiration that's not well formed. But I think the first order of business is getting clear about, well, really, what are the commitments that they're in, and then how do we engage with those in a way that brings immediacy and intimacy and authenticity to the commitment and to the things that we do automatically that kind of get in the way of them.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what comes up for me again is so much for me started to shift when I started to move. I heard you use the word immediacy, and we've talked about mindfulness and this word presence. And I think it was like this kind of dropping down from just being in my like head thinking about things, and suddenly being in the moment, being present, and starting to see the ways in which I was showing up in certain places in my life that were then having certain impacts and results, and that kind of drop down into this kind of awareness was just so transformational in of itself. You know, so much, so catalytic, so much started to change. So um, yeah, that's why I'm such a fan of this kind of work. I'm just you sent through the curriculum for the new, you know, this program that you'll be teaching on, and you've mentioned the power of embodied transformation, and I'm really thrilled this year. It's yeah, it's like it just feels like it's moving to a whole new level of rigor and dynamism. And the one of the first things I read was embodied transformation is a shorthand for a physiologically supported, qualitatively new way of being in the world. And
Isn't that a great set of words?
it's awesome. And so, I mean, we've been speaking about that, but maybe you want to just say, could you say maybe you know, a few more words about that? It seems an important statement.
Yeah. Well, you and I have sometimes see transformation a little bit differently, and I think transformation is something. It's a word that's overused and it means really different
Mm,
things to different people, and sometimes my concern about the word transformation is that, um, like when a coach promises transformation, I think they're actually promising something that they can't deliver, and that transformation is like enlightenment. And Baker Roshi said, enlightenment is an accident, practice makes us accident prone.
mm,
I think transformation is an accident, and practice makes us accident prone.
mm,
So what we can do is we can create the conditions for development, and that sometimes development happens with a bang. There's some big somatic opening or some radical insight that we can operationalize, and it legitimately can be transformational. And sometimes development happens incrementally and slowly, and like we can't even feel it. And then one day we wake up and we see that we responded to some situation that has been problematic for us in the past. We responded to it in a different way, and we weren't even aware of it until we reflected on it. And maybe that's transformational, but it's lacking in drama.
mm,
And um, so so I'm leery about promising transformation, but what I do think is transformational is the whole enterprise of the radical proposition that we can engage in a set of practices around seeing, being, and doing, which really operationalize developmental theory in a very, very pragmatic way. And that when we do that, we're actually accelerating, facilitating, lubricating a natural process of development so that it can happen more quickly in response to conditions in our society that are changing really, really fast.
mm.
And this is, Joel, this is a survival issue. We're facing existential issues as a species and as a planet. And this is the kind of um, evolutionary accelerant or developmental accelerant that I think is really crucial. The embodied part is um, that we're actually learning throughout our entire nervous system how we can stay resourceful, how we can have the best chance at responding optimally to what's coming at us. And I think traditional leadership development doesn't do this very well.
Mm. Yeah, beautiful. Well, you know, I know that we do have some differences in the way we see transformation, and yet the way you articulated it there, I'm in full agreement with. And it's you know, I think sometimes there's a tendency for it to become this like given, you know, that
Yeah,
like I can wave my magic wand and you will transform, and that's not how I see it. You know, I think
yeah.
it's about creating this shift into you know, a new way of being in the world that then makes transformation more likely, but it, you know, it's not this kind of big magic stick.
Yeah, and I think traditionally the coaching industry um, has had a subtext of bigger is better and bolder is better and transformation is good and let's get radical. And I think that gets overhyped some. That said, I think when there's a when we lift the bell jar, when there's a subject object move, there is a qualitative shift in perspective that is, it may be very subtle, and it's also transformational. It's not an incremental shift. It's a significant and qualitative shift from one point of view to another point of view. And I think it's legitimate to call that transformation. It's legitimate to say that those shifts can become over time physiologically supported and sustainable, and it doesn't have the drama and the fireworks and the sparks and so forth that we sometimes associate with the word transformation. It's that more sort of drama-laced interpretation of transformation that I struggle with, because I think coaches get into trouble a lot when they overpromise and underdeliver. I'd rather underpromise and overdeliver.
So one of the things that we talked about being for resilience, and something I noticed you written in the curriculum for that was, distinguishing between these habit states and between creative, spacious, resilient states.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk about that kind of shift, or making that kind of distinction and what becomes possible when you do.
Well, I did actually had a coaching conversation, a coaching demonstration for a class from another coaching certification program earlier this very day. And so I was coaching this guy I'd never met, and he was talking about a particular habit that comes up with people that he's working with that triggers for him this this narrative about whether he's worthy or whether he's sufficient or whether he's going to fail at what he's offering. And that comes up with him, and as he was talking about that, I could see him on the video feed, his jaw clenching and him sort of making himself a little bit smaller. And then his habit then is to jump in and be prescriptive and give advice. So we were talking about that, and he was actually talking about that palpable felt experience in the body of this triggered reaction. And because that response was real time, it was right here in the conversation, we could work on it, we could operate on it, and he could actually discover a way of staying present with this triggered shrinking reaction, and then discovering for himself a process or an internal shift in attention that actually accessed a much more generative state. And with that, he could imagine a very different response to the person who had just triggered him. So that's an example of working in real time in the domains of seeing, being, and doing, with a triggered habit reaction and what we might think of as a more resilient, embodied inner state from which he could respond differently.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love that once you get that kind of literacy, that kind of, you can make those distinctions in the moment, so much more becomes possible. Makes me think about, we did discuss like the option of doing a coaching demo to maybe, give people a little taste. And I know the nature of coaching demos is you never know what's going to happen, but
if you're game, I'm game.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say to you. I noticed I'm game, and I immediately noticed there's a kind of bracing feeling, or at least a amplification of my energy and sensation in my body as I make myself available to be coached.
Right. So if you'd like and you're willing, we could move right into that right here from this space that you're in, which is a little bit triggered.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's do it.
Yeah.
You know me.
Okay. So what are you noticing? What are you sensing in yourself?
There's a slight apprehension. There's a cocktail of things I'm noticing. So there's a like this apprehension or bracing feeling of what might come, and there's excitement too. You know, I feel quite alive right now, and then I notice there's some thoughts kind of pass by, like, oh my God, I'm gonna get coached, and everybody's gonna see me get coached, and they're gonna judge me, like they're gonna
Right.
see my. So there's a kind of a bit of shame in there. I notice they're gonna see my faults or something.
Yeah, that's great. So thank you for saying that, and I appreciate the vulnerability in being kind of the MC of this whole program, and then you opening yourself up as a demonstration client in one of the marketing videos. Like that, there's a boldness and a rawness in that I appreciate.
Ah, yeah,
Yeah,
but yeah, I know. It's like hearing that. I've something just dropped in me, and I feel more tender, but I feel more grounded as well. Like it's okay.
yeah. And so Joel, that boldness and this vulnerability that you're bringing forward right now, how does that, how does what, how does this move right here in this moment? How does that connect to what you're up to in the world out there?
I mean, it's a perfect, kind of holographic kind of, the hologram. If you break it into pieces, it still contains everything. So
Yeah,
um, it encapsulates that. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm in this process of, bringing my work into the world more, developing myself as a coach, owning my coaching practice and my work. And with that, there comes both, yeah, this kind of, apprehension and wondering of how it will be met by the world.
great.
And then there is some shame in there, or like vulnerability, like people are gonna say it's not good enough, or who are you to do that?
Yeah,
And yet there also is this, like, there's just a commitment towards that, and an excitement too, so it's a
yeah,
real, yeah.
yeah, beautiful. So in this moment right now, Joel, in the domain of seeing, you're describing um, this experience of sort of a bold stepping into this vulnerable place that right now, being a demonstration client to your prospective audience.
Mm.
Um, and you're also seeing how that connects to this larger issue of your extending yourself, which also has a vulnerability, extending your professional offer in the world in new ways.
Mm.
So there's a seeing there, a connectedness, a relevance.
Yeah, yeah. And there is, and I'm seeing that because I think I'm because you're really helping me to see that context too.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so right now, I want to really invite you um, to track and report what's happening on the level of your inner state. So what are you noticing in the realm of sensation?
Um, I notice my belly.
Hmm.
I notice, like, all over my whole body, there's a kind of tingling,
Hmm.
and I'm aware of my belly. Like, it's just relaxed, um, and there's a sensation of, that feeling of, like, when you're feeling triggered, and a bit kind of apprehensive, and then suddenly you get seen and it becomes safe, and you're allowed to be there, and it's like it feels, whew, everything drops and settles. That there's that
Right.
kind of sensation,
Yeah.
which I can't quite name in one word, but
Yeah. And so here you are showing up fully in this conversation. And I want to ask you, Joel, what you're doing to resource yourself. Like, how are you staying here? There might be uh, some tendency to play small or to cover up that vulnerability, and you're staying right here. You're extending yourself out in a very public way. So how are you resourcing yourself to do that?
That's a great question. Well, I think there's two things that come up. One is um, feeling my commitment,
Hmm.
that's come to the foreground as you've asked me that question. Um, I'm feeling my commitment towards the way I want to show up in the world.
Hmm.
And that commitment isn't just a concept, it has a kind of embodied feel to it. It has a galvanizing kind of effect.
Where in your body do you sense that galvanizing effect?
Um, well, I'm really feeling dropped in my belly now.
Yeah.
I'm feeling a kind of sinking and a solidity.
Hmm.
I can really feel my feet on the floor,
Yeah.
and I feel like a sense of power.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So notice this question of how you're doing this, because we can notice these phenomena that happen, but the question of how you're doing it um, actually makes you the agent of it. And so when you describe touching in, feeling your belly, feeling your feet, accessing this base of power, when you describe that, then it becomes replicable. Instead of being some magical phenomenon, all of a sudden it's a practice that you can replicate and you can do over and over again. And this is, in fact, the key to embodiment.
It's beautiful. I mean, I feel touched because um, two things. Like one is I'm like back in touch with something that's really important for me, and so there's a very fulfilled feeling. It's like yes, it's a recognition. Wow, this is so important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, there is a sense of I'm like an increased propensity towards action.
Right.
Towards like I'm taking a stand for this,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna act on it.
Yeah. So as we move towards completion on this
Mm.
little demo coaching parenthesis, from this body, from this state, what new actions can you take out there in the world?
Well, trust comes up, so I see that the action of um, like revealing myself is actually a powerful step,
Hmm.
um, rather than it being something to be afraid of. That it actually there's a yeah like it's confirms who I am is okay in the world, and that it's met with a kind of appreciation or something to show myself.
Yeah, great. Can you anticipate a very specific
Mm.
situation in the next week or two when um, that stand and this inner state will serve you well as you extend yourself out in some way?
Yeah, I can. I mean, straight away, I'm going to be leading a group of 35 executives tomorrow in a session, and yeah, it's going to play out there. And I feel like both in terms of the state itself, it's like really plugging in, and I'll be able to more easily access it, but also in terms of me revealing myself and really showing up there with them, it's going to create it's made that more likely.
Great.
Mm.
So, so Joel, what are you seeing differently about this than what you saw 15 minutes ago?
It's um it's really that powerful sense of revelation, um, that comes through being with my experience as it is,
Mhm.
and yeah, I can't quite put it into words, but it's. Let me slow down a minute. like it's happening right now.
Yeah.
So there's a way in which I could go down a route there of getting a bit more contracted again. I've got to find the right answer to make this a great coaching demo.
Hmm.
But then I started to notice the sensation of that contraction, and then there's a relaxation, and also in the revealing of that there's a relaxation, and I think that perfectly encapsulates the thing that I'm seeing differently than before is yeah, it's like a kind of affirmation of who I am and my own sovereignty
Yeah,
and
great.
my own
So,
power.
yeah. So what I heard is that you started down the road of an answer, and it wasn't quite landing, and then you took a pause to resource yourself,
Mm,
and you actually came back into yourself to access more clarity. Did a second take at it, and the second take came out in a way that was much more grounded.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the move.
It's so practical, isn't it?
It is very practical. Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
let's cut on the coaching demo, and thank you for that. That was really fun.
Mm,
Um, I want to just offer a couple of editorial comments, and we can riff off of this a little bit. And I'm really speaking to your audience here that what I imagine some people might tell themselves after listening to this demo is, well, that's great, but Joel's Joel, and he's got a lot of experience in that, and I can't make those kinds of coaching moves, and my clients aren't like Joel. They're alpha male, um, put your head to the wall executives, and they're not going to do this kind of stuff. And yes, granted all that, Joel has a lot of somatic awareness. Joel and I have a relationship that has a lot of layers, and it goes back years. And um, and what we're illustrating here is the principles of how we work in the present moment with seeing, being, and doing to generate different kinds of outcomes. And it's not that that's what this course is about. Is if you knew how to do that, you wouldn't join the course. You're joining the course because here's some new territory and some radically different ways of working with a coaching conversation. And we all get to be beginners here and experiment and try things. I think that sometimes we sell ourselves and our clients short by um, by generating a story about what our client will be willing to do, and then we keep ourselves safe because we don't have to take the risk of trying new moves. And
mm,
so, really, what we're doing in this course is preparing people with theoretical frameworks coupled with pragmatic tools that allow you to deepen your coaching in really grounded, evidence-based uh, ways that get better results. That's what we're up to here.
mm. Yeah, I love it. I love it. And perhaps you could tell us just a little bit more about, what you're going to be covering in the program, and yeah, like what is it that you're excited about this year with the program?
Well, I can't quite remember how many poets I've done before, but there have been several, and every time that you invite me to play with you, uh, I get to bring some new things forward. So one of the things that feels new and different is um, refining some work around how we identify the commitments that we want to make and how we work with clients to support them in identifying their commitments. And so we'll spend some time in the first module talking about what I call the polarity of service and fulfillment, and that we can organize commitments around service, which is giving what the world wants, and we can organize our commitments around fulfillment, which is receiving what we want. And if we do either one without the other, it's problematic.
Mm,
So the truest, most generative commitments that we can imagine are the ones that do both, that both serve what the world wants and are fulfilling for us. And so So we'll play with that as a toolkit and experience that a little bit. But it's also to see this polarity is um, it's a really crucial move in development that we begin to see the systems that we're embedded in. And so what we can experience is a dilemma. Well, do I do what my market wants or do I do what I want? We can experience that as a dilemma, but when we step back and we make that dilemma object, we actually see that it's a dynamic energy system. It's a polarity that we have to navigate. And so we work with this business about making commitments, but in the process, we also get to discover something about the nature of polarities themselves, which when we start to see them, they're everywhere. So this informs our seeing of the context in which we operate. And then we'll move from there. In the second session, we'll talk about seeing directed internally and the awareness map and how do we track the different channels of our own awareness, which is really the raw materials. It's the basis for how we can spot our habits in the act. The third session will be about being and state regulation and cultivating generative inner states. And then the fourth is how do we translate that into action, and specifically what we call developmental cross training, where we have different kinds of fieldwork and practices that access different parts of the nervous system and actually reinforce each other. And that will set up, I think, quite well 4 more wonderful sessions with Richard Strozzi Heckler, and then some other sessions he's got lined up. So
Yeah.
I'm excited about it, and I look forward to kicking it off.
Yeah, well, me too. And the thing I love about this is like hearing you articulate those has me really excited. Even though I've been through the program before, it's evolving, and I think it's becoming more rigorous, and new dimensions are emerging. And I'm really excited to kind of hear what you are going to deliver on those. So yeah, and it feels like a good place to bring our conversation to a close. And
Wonderful.
yeah, I mean, I notice I'm feeling very resilient and creative right now, and I got a kind of, cheeky little coaching session from you out of it. So
It's not a
great.
double dip in there, was it? Yeah, it's great. I enjoyed it also, and I appreciate your suggestion of going live a little bit, which is a departure from the usual interview format, but I think also brings some immediacy and delightfulness to this. So,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Hello, Joel here again. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. And if you're curious about going deeper into all the topics we've talked about today, then I encourage you to take a look at our coach training. During the training, Doug, Mandy Blake, Richard Strozzi Heckler, and Pete Hamiel are going to teach you how to facilitate embodied transformation with your clients. And you're going to learn how to see your clients' conditioned, habituated patterns as they arise. So you'll learn how to help them disrupt these patterns and shift into new, more empowered and creative ways of being. Learning this stuff was really the missing key for me in my own coaching, and it gave me this confidence that I could really help my clients. So if you like the sound of this, then you can find more details at www.powerofembodiedtransformation.com.